Angela Morris had spent 15 years waiting for her husband, David, to come home. When he was sentenced to prison for armed robbery, she was only 24, full of belief that love could outlast anything. She wrote letters every week, visited him on holidays, and never took off her wedding ring. Friends told her to move on, but she refused. She worked long hours as a nurse's assistant, raised their daughter alone, and built her life around the hope that one day they would be a family again. When David was finally released, the small town they had once shared gathered to celebrate. Everyone admired Angela's loyalty, calling her a woman of faith and endurance. She believed, in that moment, that her years of pain had meaning. The first few months after his return felt almost magical. David tried to adjust to a world that had changed while he was gone. Angela cooked his favorite meals, helped him apply for jobs, and listened when he spoke about prison life. They laughed again, cleaned the house together, and talked about starting fresh. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. David carried an unease that Angela could not name. He spent long hours outside, came home smelling of alcohol, and avoided her touch. The man she had waited for so long now seemed like a stranger wearing her husband's face. Still, she held on to her hope. She told herself that love could heal him, that time could soften the rough edges that prison had carved into him. As the weeks passed, Angela began to feel sick. It started with fatigue, then came the fevers and night sweats. She thought it was stress or exhaustion from work, but deep down, a quiet fear grew. When she finally went to the clinic for testing, her world collapsed. The doctor told her she was HIV positive. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had lived carefully, faithfully, and devotedly. There was no possible source except the man she had loved. The truth struck her harder than any prison sentence: David had infected her. She searched for answers, but none came. He denied everything, shrugged off her tears, and disappeared for nights at a time. Angela's health worsened, and her heart turned heavy with anger and disbelief. The years she had sacrificed, the loneliness she had endured, all of it had led to this betrayal. Her daughter moved out for safety, leaving Angela alone with the man who had destroyed her. The house that once symbolized reunion became a cage filled with silence and resentment. One stormy evening, after another violent argument, the pain that had lived inside her erupted. Years of loyalty, love, and disappointment collided in a moment of despair. When police arrived hours later, David was dead, and Angela sat on the floor, trembling but calm. She did not resist arrest, nor did she try to explain. Her story spread across the nation, not as a tale of crime, but as a warning. The woman who once believed that love could conquer everything had learned the hardest truth of all. That some loves are prisons of their own making. Angela's arrest shook the entire community. The same people who once praised her loyalty now whispered behind closed doors, unable to understand how the woman who had waited 15 years for her husband could take his life. The news spread fast, turning into headlines and social media debates. Some called her a murderer, others called her a victim. Behind the cold walls of the county jail, Angela sat in silence, replaying every moment that had led her there. The cell was small, the air heavy, but for the first time in years, she felt a strange sense of release. There were no more secrets to uncover, no more lies to live through. She had already lost everything that mattered, and all that was left was the truth. While waiting for trial, Angela was visited by her daughter, Jasmine, who had grown from a shy teenager into a determined young woman. Seeing her mother behind glass broke her heart, but Jasmine did not turn away. She wanted to understand. Angela couldn't find the words to explain what 15 years of waiting, betrayal, and illness had done to her. She had believed that love was sacred, that standing by someone through their worst moments proved her worth. But love without honesty had turned her into a shadow of herself. The HIV diagnosis was not just a physical wound, it was the death of her faith in the life she had built. In court, Angela's story unfolded piece by piece. The prosecutor painted her as vengeful, unable to forgive her husband's past. The defense argued she was a broken woman, pushed to her limit by emotional and physical pain. Journalists filled the courtroom, capturing every tear and gesture. The medical reports confirmed that David had been HIV positive long before his release and had never sought treatment. Prison records revealed he had refused testing and ignored medical warnings. It was proof of what Angela had always feared: he had known, and he had kept it from her. The betrayal was deeper than infidelity, it was an act of destruction. When Angela took the stand, she spoke softly, her voice steady. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she told the court how love can become a trap when it's built on sacrifice alone. She described the nights she spent waiting by the phone, the endless prayers, and the hope that turned to poison. Her words silenced the room. Some jurors looked away, others wiped tears from their eyes. Even those who condemned her could not deny the weight of her suffering. The verdict was inevitable. Angela was sentenced to prison for manslaughter, her actions seen as both a crime and a cry of despair. Yet inside those walls, she found something she hadn't felt in years: clarity. She began to attend support groups, helped other inmates through illness, and spoke about the dangers of losing yourself for love. Over time, her name became a story shared by women across the country. Angela Morris was no longer just the woman who killed her husband, she was the woman who survived her own heartbreak and turned her pain into a warning for others. Years passed inside the correctional facility, but time moved differently for Angela. The days blended into one another, marked only by the faint light that seeped through the barred window each morning. At first, she counted every sunrise, believing that freedom was something measured by the days left on a sentence. But as the years went on, she began to understand that freedom was something deeper, something that could exist even behind steel doors. She found purpose in helping others, caring for inmates who were sick, and volunteering in the prison infirmary. Her training as a nurse's assistant became her anchor. The women she tended to saw her not as a criminal, but as a healer, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and still wake up with a will to keep going. Letters came often from people she had never met. Women from different parts of the country wrote to her after watching documentaries about her case. They spoke of their own heartbreaks, abusive partners, and the fear of leaving relationships that were slowly killing them. Angela read each letter carefully, answering as many as she could. For many, her words were a light in dark places. She never defended her actions, but she spoke about the importance of choosing oneself before it's too late. What began as an attempt to fill her lonely nights became a mission that gave her life meaning again. Her daughter, Jasmine, visited every few months, now older and stronger. The visits were shorter than Angela wished, but they were filled with peace. Jasmine had graduated from college, inspired by her mother's resilience, and had started working with organizations that helped women escape abusive relationships. She told her mother that her story had become more than a tragedy, it had become a movement. Angela felt pride, but also sorrow. The cost of that lesson had been everything she once loved. Still, she was grateful that her pain had not been wasted. Inside, she began to keep a journal. Each page was filled with reflections on love, betrayal, forgiveness, and the long journey toward self-worth. The journal became her voice, and through it, she began to heal. The HIV diagnosis that once felt like a death sentence became part of her identity, but not her end. She took her medications regularly and educated others in the facility about living with the virus. Slowly, the stigma within the prison walls began to fade. Her courage inspired both inmates and staff, reminding them that even broken lives could carry purpose. When parole hearings finally began, Angela spoke not of redemption but of growth. She admitted her mistakes, not as excuses but as lessons learned. The board members saw a woman who had faced unimaginable pain and emerged with compassion instead of hatred. Whether she walked out of those walls or not, Angela had already reclaimed her freedom. She had turned her tragedy into a legacy, showing that even in the darkest chapters of life, the human spirit can find its way back to the light. Angela was released from prison after serving 12 years. She stepped out into the open air on a cool autumn morning, the sky wide and bright above her. The world felt unfamiliar, louder and faster than she remembered. The streets had changed, new buildings replaced the old, and people no longer recognized her face. She carried only a small bag of clothes and her worn journal, the one that had kept her sane through the years. For the first time in a long while, she was truly alone, but she was not afraid. Her heart, once heavy with pain, now carried a quiet strength. The past could not be undone, but it could be faced. Jasmine met her at the gates. The embrace between mother and daughter lasted for minutes, silent and trembling. Jasmine had built a life of her own, and she wanted to help her mother start again. They found a small apartment in a quiet part of town, where no one recognized Angela's name. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping women who had survived domestic violence. The work was difficult, but it gave her purpose. She could see her younger self reflected in the faces of those women, hopeful, scared, desperate to believe in love despite the pain. Each time she shared her story, she saw how her truth broke through their fear. The first year after her release was not easy. Some people still judged her. When her past was discovered, a few whispered in disapproval or avoided her entirely. But Angela did not let their opinions define her anymore. She had spent too many years living for others. Now, every day she chose peace over fear, healing over shame. She found a quiet joy in small things, the smell of rain, the sound of birds at dawn, the laughter of her daughter. Living with HIV was still a daily challenge, but she faced it with acceptance. The virus had once been a symbol of betrayal, but now it reminded her of survival. Documentary filmmakers reached out again, asking to follow her journey after prison. At first, Angela refused. She didn't want her life to be just another tragedy retold for entertainment. But after much thought, she agreed, realizing that her story could save others. The new film didn't focus on the crime but on the woman who rose from it. It showed her counseling sessions, her volunteer work, and the quiet moments of rebuilding a life from nothing. Viewers saw not a murderer, but a survivor, a woman who had learned that forgiveness starts within. As the documentary aired, thousands of letters arrived once again. Women thanked her for giving them courage to leave harmful relationships. Some said her story helped them seek help before it was too late. Angela realized that redemption was not about erasing the past, it was about transforming it into something meaningful. Her pain had become a message, her scars a testimony. She had walked through darkness, but she had found her light, and now she was determined to share it with the world. Years later, Angela's life had settled into something peaceful and steady. The chaos that once defined her story had faded into quiet purpose. She still lived in the same modest apartment, surrounded by plants she nurtured like fragile reminders of growth. Every morning, she brewed a cup of tea, opened her journal, and wrote a few lines about gratitude. Time had softened her features, but there was strength in her eyes, a kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving storms and learning to breathe again after them. She no longer ran from her past, instead, she carried it as part of who she was. Her work at the community center had expanded into a larger program called the Phoenix Project, designed to help women rebuild their lives after abuse and imprisonment. Angela became a counselor, guiding others through fear and self-doubt with patience and empathy. She never hid her story. When newcomers joined, nervous and ashamed, she would tell them that healing was not about forgetting but about facing the truth without breaking. Her words carried the weight of lived experience, and that honesty drew people to her. The same pain that once destroyed her had become the foundation of her new strength. Jasmine often visited with her own family now. Watching her daughter laugh and live freely filled Angela with quiet pride. The cycle of suffering had been broken, her mistakes had not defined Jasmine's future. They sometimes spoke of David, not with hatred, but with sadness for the life he had chosen. Angela no longer wished to rewrite that chapter. It had shaped both of them in ways that could not be undone, but it had also led them toward the lessons that saved them. Acceptance, she realized, was not weakness, it was peace. The documentary that once told her story continued to circulate online, inspiring new audiences every year. Colleges invited her to speak about resilience and forgiveness, and health organizations worked with her to raise awareness about HIV prevention and treatment. When she stood on those stages, she spoke plainly, without dramatics or self-pity. She told people that love without respect could destroy even the kindest heart, and that silence in the face of pain could be more dangerous than anger. She urged them to choose themselves before their strength was stolen by someone else's mistakes. Her message was simple but powerful: survival was not the end, it was the beginning of becoming whole. In her final years, Angela often walked by the lake near her home, watching the sunlight shimmer across the water. She thought about the girl she had been, the one who believed love could fix everything, and smiled softly. That version of herself had been naive, but she had also been brave. Every choice, every heartbreak, had brought her to this calm moment. When people remembered Angela Morris, they no longer spoke only of tragedy. They spoke of courage, transformation, and the enduring power of healing. Her story had begun in pain, but it ended in peace, and through it, she taught the world that even the deepest wounds can bloom into light.